Just 5 years after the end of World War II, the world was once again on edge. The major powers, armed with nuclear weapons and deep suspicions, were divided along ideological lines. Korea became one of the first battlegrounds of this Cold War. After Japan's defeat, the peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel. Soviet forces occupied the north, while U.S. troops took control of the south. Both powers agreed it would be temporary, but when they withdrew in 1948, 2 new states emerged. Syngman Rhee declared the Republic of Korea in the south, and Kim Il-sung proclaimed the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north. Each claimed sovereignty over the entire peninsula, and tensions quickly escalated into border clashes and insurgencies. In the north, Kim Il-sung sought reunification by force. Initially, Stalin hesitated, focused on Europe, and only provided military equipment. But China, under Mao Zedong, was receptive. Thousands of Korean veterans from the Chinese Civil War joined the North Korean People's Army. With Soviet permission, Kim launched a full-scale invasion of South Korea on June 25, 1950. Equipped with 223,000 troops, 150 tanks, and 132 aircraft, the KPA advanced rapidly. The South Korean army, outnumbered and poorly armed, was quickly pushed back. By June 28, Seoul had fallen, and tens of thousands of ROK soldiers were trapped north of the Han River. The United States, taken by surprise, responded under the United Nations flag. Truman ordered the 7th Fleet to protect Taiwan and sought international support for Korea. UN forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, rushed to aid South Korea, but initial engagements exposed severe weaknesses. Task Force Smith, a small U.S. unit, was routed at Osan by North Korean armor, highlighting the limitations of post-Wonwon demobilization. Air superiority helped, but inexperienced troops, limited anti-tank weapons, and rapid KPA advances created a deadly situation. By August, North Korean forces had reached the Pusan perimeter, threatening to overrun the last defensive line in the south. MacArthur's bold counterattack at Incheon in September 1950 changed the tide. The amphibious landing cut North Korean supply lines, forcing a retreat and recapturing Seoul. UN forces then advanced into North Korea, capturing Pyongyang and approaching the Yalu River. But this progress triggered Chinese intervention. Alarmed by the proximity of US-led forces to its border and perceiving a threat to its security, China sent 225,000 troops to support North Korea. The Chinese attacks caught UN forces off guard, overwhelming units in intense night assaults and forcing a retreat to the south. By the end of 1950, UN forces had been pushed back, and the war settled into a bloody stalemate. MacArthur's calls to bomb China, even with nuclear weapons, were rejected, and he was eventually relieved of command. General Matthew Ridgway took over, reorganizing UN forces and stabilizing the front. The conflict now resembled the trench warfare of World War I, with both sides digging in, launching limited offensives, and enduring terrible winter conditions. Millions of civilians were caught in the middle, with countless casualties and mass displacement. Negotiations began in July 1951 but were slow and contentious. Disputes over the 38th parallel and the return of prisoners of war stalled progress. Meanwhile, combat continued along static front lines. Air power remained a decisive factor, with UN aircraft controlling the skies against a partially mechanized Chinese and North Korean army. Jet fighters clashed in MiG Alley, with U.S. pilots gaining an edge due to superior training, even against advanced Soviet-made MiGs. Helicopters, including early models like the H-13 Sioux and H-19 Chickasaw, provided critical medevac and observation capabilities, though the majority of frontline operations remained grueling infantry engagements. Throughout 1952 and into 1953, limited offensives continued. Positions changed hands, artillery duels raged, and soldiers endured extreme weather. Despite repeated attacks, UN forces held the line along the 38th parallel. By early 1953, both sides were exhausted, and the economic cost, combined with high casualties, finally pushed negotiators toward agreement. Changes in leadership in the US and the Soviet Union, along with nuclear deterrence and failed offensives, created the conditions for a ceasefire. On July 27, 1953, an armistice was signed. A demilitarized zone roughly along the pre-war 38th parallel was established, and prisoners of war were allowed to choose their fate. South Korean President Syngman Rhee refused to sign, leaving a formal state of war technically in place. The human cost was staggering. Estimates suggest over 1 million civilians died in the South, 1.5 million in the North, and military losses on all sides reached hundreds of thousands. So who won the Korean War? From a military standpoint, the answer is complicated. South Korea and the UN succeeded in defending the South and preventing communist unification. North Korea survived as a state, avoiding destruction and retaining strategic territory. China preserved a buffer against US-aligned forces and enhanced its global influence. The Soviet Union gained strategic leverage without committing troops directly. Yet from a human perspective, the war was devastating, leaving the Korean people as the ultimate victims of the conflict. The legacy of the Korean War is profound. It set the stage for the Cold War in Asia, reinforced the division of the Korean Peninsula, and demonstrated the dangers of limited wars between major powers. It also showcased the destructive potential of modern warfare, including the early role of nuclear weapons, jets, and helicopters. Decades later, the armistice line remains, a constant reminder of a conflict that ended without a true victor, but left an enduring mark on global history.